Horse interrupts millionaire's wedding and the reason leaves guests in shock. The bride, who until then believed she was living a perfect fairy tale, sees her life crumble in an instant. The animal's appearance reveals a dark secret, hidden for years. Amid the revelation, she discovers that everything around her has been manipulated by those she trusted most. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue! I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The mirror reflected a radiant bride, but Emily felt something was wrong. The French lace dress embraced her body perfectly, the pearl embroidery sparkled under the golden light of the room, and the silk veil fell like a cascade over her shoulders. It should have been the happiest day of her life, but a strange sensation grew in her chest, like a shadow that refused to disappear even under the Montana morning sun. Her bridesmaids moved around her like colorful butterflies, adjusting every detail, whispering words of encouragement and making jokes to calm the typical nerves of a bride. But Emily barely heard them. Her thoughts were in the field, in the absence that had been disturbing her since she woke up. Thunder wasn't in his usual place. The black horse, her faithful companion for 15 years, always waited for her in the pasture near the main house. When she woke up, it was a morning ritual that had calmed her since childhood, opening the curtains and seeing his majestic silhouette grazing under the ranch trees. Today, the pasture was empty. You're so quiet," said Madison, her best friend since school, while pinning a last white rose in the bride's hair. "Nervousness is normal, but you seem distant." Emily forced a smile. "It's just butterflies in my stomach, you know how it is." But it wasn't just that. Thunder had disappeared without a trace. The ranch hands had been searching the entire property since dawn, but found no tracks in the damp earth. A horse of his stature didn't simply disappear. The bedroom door opened, and Mrs. Carmen, the housekeeper who had raised her after her parents' death, entered, carrying a tray with coffee and sugar rolls. Her dark eyes, always so affectionate, seemed worried. "My dear, this arrived for you," she said, extending a cream-colored envelope with no return address. "A boy brought it a little while ago and ran off." Emily took the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. There was no name, just her first name written by hand in a calligraphy she didn't recognize. She carefully tore the paper, trying not to show the anxiety growing inside her. The words on the paper made her heart race. "Not everything is as it seems. Be careful who you trust. A shadow watches closely." "What is it, Em?" Madison approached, noticing the paleness that had taken over her friend's face. "Nothing important," she lied, quickly folding the paper and tucking it into the vanity drawer. Probably just some bad joke. But the words echoed in her mind like an alarm bell. Combined with Thunder's disappearance, they created an atmosphere of unease that she couldn't ignore. During all the months of wedding preparations, everything had gone perfectly. Nathan, her fiancé, had been attentive and affectionate, always present for every decision, every detail of the ceremony. Uncle Arthur, her guardian since childhood, had completely supported the union, even saying he couldn't have chosen a better husband for her. So why did she feel like she was about to make a terrible mistake? A strong wind shook the lace curtains and Emily shuddered. She approached the window and looked out at the gardens, where dozens of workers were finishing the final preparations. White tents decorated with wildflowers, tables covered with linen, tablecloths, golden chairs arranged in perfect rows. Everything was impeccable to receive the 300 guests. "What a beautiful view," sighed one of the bridesmaids. Uncle Arthur really outdid himself with the organization. Emily nodded mechanically, but her eyes were searching for something different on the horizon. In the distant hills, where the pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, she hoped to see a familiar figure galloping back home. Thunder always returned when he sensed she needed him, as if there was an invisible connection between them. "Child, you need to eat something," insisted Mrs. Carmen, offering her a cup of coffee. "The day will be long, and you need energy." Emily drank the tasteless coffee, her mind still processing the words from the mysterious note. Who could have sent that warning? And about what exactly should she be careful? Nathan had always been transparent with her about his business, about his intentions. He worked as a lawyer in town, had a solid reputation, came from a respected family. Uncle Arthur had known him for years, even before she did. A noise outside caught her attention. Through the window she saw two men talking near the stables, gesturing in an agitated manner. One was Joshua, the ranch's oldest foreman, who knew every inch of that land. The other was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in simple work clothes. "I'm going to step out quickly," she told the bridesmaids. "I just want to check something." "Emily, you can't leave like this. We still have to finish your makeup and—" Madison protested, but she was already heading for the door. "5 minutes, I promise." She descended the marble stairs of the main house carefully to avoid tripping on her dress, heading to the back of the property. The sun was already high and the day promised to be hot, typical of an October day in Montana. As she approached the men, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Never seen anything like it, Mr. Joshua. The horse was there last night, I'm sure. Tracks stop at the gate, as if he had flown. The girl will be very worried if she finds out." Joshua saw her approaching and quickly dismissed the other man with a gesture. His sun-weathered face carried a grave expression she rarely saw. "Miss Emily, you shouldn't be here now. It's your wedding day. You should be getting ready." "Joshua, I need to know about Thunder. Where is he?" The man lowered his eyes, fidgeting with his leather hat between calloused hands. "We don't know, girl. It's like he vanished into thin air. Never seen anything like it in 40 years of taking care of horses." "That doesn't make sense. Thunder would never leave the property alone. He knows every corner here. It's his home." "That's what bothers me most," murmured Joshua. "His tracks stop at the back gate, the one that leads to the old road. After that, nothing. Dry earth, no marks." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The old road was seldom used, serving only for some delivery trucks and rural workers. Why would Thunder have gone in that direction? And how did his tracks simply disappear? "Keep looking, please. He has to be somewhere." "Don't worry, Miss Emily, we'll find him." She returned to the house with a heavy heart, climbing the stairs with less haste than before. The mysterious note, Thunder's disappearance, the constant feeling that something was wrong. Everything mixed in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't put together. Back in the room, she found her bridesmaids in a state of controlled alert. Madison was holding the veil with excessive care, while the others organized the accessories on the bed. Something strange happened," said Madison, her voice slightly altered. "When you left, we found this stuck to your veil." She extended her hand, revealing a long, shiny black feather that dramatically contrasted with the white lace of the veil. It was a feather that Emily knew well, identical to those she found in the field after Thunder ran freely, losing hair and feathers that stuck to his mane during morning gallops. "Where did this come from?" she whispered, taking the feather with trembling fingers. "We don't know. It was stuck right here at shoulder height, as if someone had placed it purposely." Emily examined the feather against the light. It was definitely from Thunder, no doubt about it. But how had it ended? Up on her veil. And why? Was it a message? A sign? The words from the note returned to her mind. "A shadow watches closely." Was it possible that someone had taken Thunder and was now trying to send her signals? But who would do such a thing, and for what purpose? "Girls, I need a moment alone," she said, sitting heavily in the armchair in front of the vanity. Who you're scaring us? What's happening?" Madison approached, placing an affectionate hand on her shoulder. "I can't explain. It's as if everything I believed was right suddenly makes no sense." She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The radiant bride from minutes ago had given way to a confused and apprehensive woman. The brown eyes that sparkled with happiness now carried a shadow of doubt that she couldn't disguise. On the vanity, among the perfumes and jewelry, was a photo of her parents on their wedding day, smiling, embracing with the ranch in the background, the same ranch that was now her home and her responsibility. They had built that place with love and dedication, transforming it into a prosperous and respected property in the region. They always talked about their dreams for the future, about how they wanted to use the family's prosperity to help the local community. She touched the golden frame of the photo, feeling a connection with her parents that she hadn't experienced for a long time. Was it possible they were trying to send her a sign through thunder? The idea seemed absurd, but in her emotional state, nothing seemed impossible. The sound of cars arriving at the ranch brought her back to reality. The first guests were arriving, and in a few hours she would be standing at the altar, promising eternal love to Nathan. But the doubts growing inside her were like a storm forming on the horizon, inevitable and potentially devastating. She stored the black feather in the same drawer where she had placed the mysterious note, deciding she would face those mysteries after the ceremony. Perhaps they were just strange coincidences, the product of her bridal nerves. Perhaps Thunder had simply found a passage in the fence and would return soon. Perhaps the note was really a bad joke from some guest. But as her bridesmaids touched up her makeup and adjusted the last details of the dress, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. And deep in her heart, a voice whispered that perhaps this change was necessary, even if painful. St. Teresa's church had never seemed so majestic as on that Saturday in October. White flowers adorned each pew, scented candles created a solemn and romantic atmosphere, and the organ echoed soft melodies that touched the hearts of the guests already in their places. Emily observed everything from the sacristy, where she awaited the moment of her triumphant entrance. Uncle Arthur, elegant in his dark tuxedo, adjusted his tie nervously while checking his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. At 58, he still maintained the imposing bearing that had made him respected in Montana's business circles. His gray hair was perfectly combed, and his blue eyes, so similar to Emily's father's, shone with an emotion she couldn't completely decipher. "Are you nervous, Uncle?" she asked, trying to break the tension hanging in the air. "Nervous, me?" he laughed, but the sound came out forced. "I'm emotional, my dear. Seeing you getting married, fulfilling your dreams, it's like I'm giving away my own daughter." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. Arthur had been her protector and guide since she lost her parents at 12. He had assumed not only her guardianship, but also the administration of the ranch and the family business, always ensuring she had the best education and all the opportunities her parents would have wanted for her. "Thank you for everything, Uncle, for taking care of me all these years, for being both father and mother when I needed it most." He hugged her affectionately, but Emily noticed a rigidity in his muscles, as if something deeply bothered him. When they separated, his eyes avoided hers for a moment. "Nathan is a good man, Emily. You made the right choice." The way he said, it sounded more like a statement trying to convince himself than genuine certainty. Emily was about to question him when the door opened and Father Anthony entered, smiling and dressed in his best ceremonial robes. "My child, what a beautiful bride! Are you ready for this special moment?" "I am, Father," she responded automatically, though inside she felt she was lying. Outside, the organ's sound changed to the wedding march. It was time. Arthur offered her his arm with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and together they walked to the church door. The sight that awaited her was breathtaking. 300 guests rose in unison, turning to admire the bride who walked slowly down the central aisle. Flowers perfumed the air. The golden light entering through the stained glass created an almost magical environment. And at the altar, Nathan awaited her with a radiant smile. But as she walked, Emily began to notice details that bothered her. Some guests whispered among themselves with worried expressions. Others observed her with an intensity that went beyond the typical admiration directed at a bride. And there were faces she didn't recognize, people who were supposedly family friends but whom she had never seen before. In the first rows, seated in places of honor, were men in dark suits who conversed in low voices, interrupting only to greet her with solemn nods. One of them, a robust man with a gray mustache, observed her with such intensity that she felt a shiver run down her spine. "Who are those men?" she whispered to Uncle Arthur. "Business associates, dear. Important people who insisted on being present on your big day." But there was something in his voice that didn't sound natural, an underlying tension she had never perceived before. As they approached the altar, Emily noticed that Arthur's hands trembled slightly on her arm. Nathan, meanwhile, was impeccable. Tall, dark-haired, with his sparkling green eyes, and a smile that had always made her feel special. He wore a custom-made tuxedo that enhanced his athletic figure, and his posture conveyed confidence and happiness. When their gazes met, he winked, affectionately as he always did to reassure her in moments of nervousness. But today, even, that familiar gesture couldn't dispel the unease growing inside her. It was as if she were seeing Nathan through a different lens, noticing details that previously went unnoticed. The calculated way he greeted certain guests, the quick glances he exchanged with some of the men in suits, the way his fingers nervously drummed on the side of his leg. When they finally reached the altar, Father Anthony began the ceremony with his melodious, experienced voice. The familiar words about love, commitment, and fidelity echoed through the church, but Emily felt as if she were hearing everything through a veil of confusion. Dear brothers and sisters, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Emily and Nathan in matrimony. As the priest spoke, Emily let her gaze wander over the congregation. In the fourth row, she recognized Mrs. Montgomery, the retired teacher who had taught her piano in childhood. The elderly woman observed her with an expression of deep concern, shaking her head almost imperceptibly, as if trying to convey some message. Further back, among Nathan's college friends, she noticed a young man she didn't know well. He held an envelope in his hands and seemed agitated, as if internally debating whether he should do something with that paper. Matrimony is a sacred institution based on love, trust, and mutual transparency. The word transparency echoed in Emily's mind like an alarm bell. Transparency. That was exactly what she felt had been lacking lately. Small details that hadn't bothered her before now seemed like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't put together. Nathan's. Meetings with Uncle Arthur that were always interrupted when she arrived. The telephone conversations in low voices that ceased abruptly when she entered the room. The documents he quickly put away whenever she approached his desk. Nathan Anthony. Miller, do you take Emily as your wife? Promise to love her and respect her. Nathan responded with a firm and clear, I do, but Emily noticed his eyes momentarily shifted to Uncle Arthur before returning to her. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but she caught it, and it made her question for the first time if she really knew the man she was about to marry. Emily Marie Parker, do you take Nathan as your husband? Promise to love him and respect him? The question hung in the air. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. An uncomfortable silence took over the church. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, and she could hear low murmurs. Emily, the priest gently repeated. At that moment, her mind was invaded by a cascade of memories and details she had ignored or rationalized. Nathan's insistence that they marry quickly, without a long engagement. The way he always changed the subject, when she asked about his clients at the law firm. The time she found him studying documents related to her family's ranch, explaining he was just familiarizing himself with the business to better help her. And Thunder's disappearance. Her horse had never disappeared like this without apparent reason. It was as if someone had deliberately removed him from her life on the most important day. She began, but her voice failed. Nathan slightly frowned, maintaining his smile but with visible tension around his eyes. It's okay, love, he whispered. Just nerves. But it wasn't just nerves, it was intuition. It was the instinct screaming inside her that something was fundamentally wrong with the whole situation. The mysterious note, Thunder's feather, in her veil, the strange looks from the guests, her uncle's palpable tension, everything combined in a discordant symphony she could no longer ignore. I need a moment, she said, her voice echoing through the silent church. A murmur of surprise ran through the congregation. Nathan took a step toward her, but she instinctively backed away. Emily, what's happening? He asked, and for the first time she noticed something in his voice she had never noticed before, an underlying authority, almost controlling. I don't know, she answered honestly. I just need some air. Before anyone could react, she turned and began walking back down the central aisle. Her steps echoed in the tense silence of the church, and she could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her back. Some people stood as if to follow her, but she quickened her pace. Reaching the church door, she deeply breathed the fresh afternoon air. The sun was high and hot, contrasting with the coldness she felt inside. She needed to think, needed to understand what was happening. To her, it was then that she heard the sound, distant but unmistakable, the neigh of a horse. Her heart raced. She knew that sound better than any music. It was Thunder's voice. The sound came from the direction of the forest behind the church, a rarely frequented area that extended for miles. Without hesitation, Emily lifted the skirt of her dress and began running toward the sound, her high-heeled shoes sinking into the soft earth. "Thunder!" she shouted. "Thunder! Where are you?" The neigh repeated, closer now, carrying an urgency she recognized. It was the sound he made when he was agitated or frightened, when something deeply bothered him. Behind her, she could hear voices calling her name. Nathan, Uncle Arthur, some guests who had left the church to see what was happening. But she didn't stop. Something inside her knew that finding Thunder was more important at that moment than any wedding ceremony. The forest swallowed her, and the sounds of the church became distant. Low branches pulled at her veil and gently tore the skirt of her dress, but she continued running, guided only by the increasingly close sound of her faithful companion. When she reached a small clearing, she finally saw him. Thunder was tied to a tree, clearly agitated, pulling at the rope that bound him. His black coat glistened with sweat, and his eyes showed the relief of finally seeing her. "My love, what did they do to you?" she whispered, approaching calmly, so as not to frighten him more. But as she approached, she noticed she wasn't alone in the clearing. A figure emerged from behind the trees, an elderly man she recognized as Manuel, a former ranch employee who had been dismissed a few months ago for health problems, according to her uncle. "Miss Emily," he said, respectfully removing his hat. "I'm sorry for doing this, but I needed to talk to you, and I knew if I brought Thunder you would come." "Manuel, but why did you take my horse? Why are you here?" The man looked nervously over his shoulder as if fearing discovery. "Because you need to know the truth before it's too late. About your uncle, about this wedding, about what really happened to your parents." His words hit Emily like lightning. "What do you mean? My parents had an accident." "It wasn't an accident, girl," Manuel's voice trembled. "And if you get married today, you'll be handing everything they built into the hands of those who should never have it." Emily's world began to spin. She sat heavily on a fallen log, trying to process the words she had just heard. Behind her, she could hear voices approaching through the forest, Nathan, Uncle Arthur, and others looking for her. "Talk quickly," she whispered urgently. "What do you know?" Manuel looked nervously around the clearing before approaching Emily. His calloused hands trembled as he took a yellowed envelope from the inside pocket of his worn jacket. "Miss Emily, I worked for your family for 25 years. I saw you born, grow up, saw how your parents loved you." His voice carried a deep pain. "What I'm going to tell you will hurt, but you need to know before signing any document today." "What documents? What are you talking about?" "The marriage contract, girl. The one your uncle and your fiancé prepared. The one that will transfer all control of the ranch and the family investments to Nathan's name as soon as you get married." Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins. "This can't be true. Nathan never told me about..." "Because he wasn't going to tell you." Manuel opened the envelope and removed some carefully preserved papers. "Look here. These are copies of documents I found in your uncle's office before being dismissed. Contracts, powers of attorney, even a new version of your parents' will." With trembling hands, Emily took the papers. The legal language was complex, but some points became immediately clear. There were clauses she had never seen before, property transfers that made no sense, and her own signature on documents she didn't remember signing. "This isn't possible. I would never sign something like this without reading it." "You did sign?" "Yes, remember those documents your uncle said were routine updates of insurance and investments? The ones he brought when you were sick with pneumonia last year." The memory returned like a cold wave. She had spent a week bedridden with high fever, barely able to keep her eyes open. Uncle Arthur had appeared with a stack of papers explaining, They were just bureaucratic formalities that needed to be signed before the legal deadline expired. I was sick. I trusted him. And he took advantage of that. Manuel's voice carried contained anger. Your parents would never let the ranch. Leave the family, Miss Emily. They had plans, big dreams for this place. Emily leafed through the documents with growing horror, recognizing her own signature on paper after paper. Contracts that gave Uncle Arthur almost unrestricted powers over her finances. Agreements that allowed the sale of parts of the property without her consent, and most shocking of all, a document establishing that in case of marriage her husband would automatically assume control of all assets. But why? Why would my own uncle do this to me? Because the ranch is worth much more than it appears. Manuel pointed to one of the sheets. They discovered oil on the neighboring property last year. Foreign companies are offering fortunes for land in the region. And there's more. Your parents had investments your uncle never mentioned, applications in international funds that are now worth millions. The voices in the forest were getting closer. Emily could distinguish Nathan's voice calling her name, with increasing urgency, and Uncle Arthur's giving orders to the men accompanying them. I need to know about my parents, she whispered quickly. You said it wasn't an accident. They discovered what Arthur was doing. Manuel quickly put the papers back in the envelope. They found irregularities in the accounts, diversions of money. They were preparing a complaint when that happened. The car accident. It wasn't an accident, girl. The brakes were sabotaged. I saw the parts in the junkyard afterward. It wasn't natural wear. Emily's world completely collapsed. Everything she had believed in, all the people she had trusted, her entire life had been built on lies. She felt as if she were falling into an endless abyss. Emily, Nathan's voice echoed very close. Where are you? We're worried. He can't see me here with you, she whispered to Manuel. If they find out you told me. Don't worry about me. Miss Emily, I'm too old to be afraid. He placed the envelope in her hands. But you're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. Don't let them destroy your dreams like they destroyed your parents. What dreams? I don't even know what to believe anymore. Your parents wanted to transform part of the ranch into a center to help needy people. They had detailed plans, had even set aside money for the project. They wanted to offer professional training, temporary housing, psychological support. They believed that those who have much should help those who have little. Emily vaguely remembered conversations between her parents when she was a child. Whispers about the special project that always made their eyes shine with emotion. She had thought they were just fantasies, vague dreams that every adult has. Does the money still exist? It exists, but it's in accounts that only your uncle has access to. If you get married today, everything goes to Nathan, and he already has buyers waiting. A branch cracked near the clearing. Manuel held Thunder by the reins and gestured for Emily to hide behind the larger trees. Get away from here, he whispered. Take the envelope, study everything carefully, and don't trust anyone who's too close to this situation. How will I know who I can trust? In yourself, girl, and in people who have nothing to gain from your decisions. Nathan emerged in the clearing at that moment, followed by Uncle Arthur and two men Emily didn't recognize. His expression of relief upon seeing her quickly transformed into something harder when he noticed Manuel. Emily, thank God. We were worried. He approached with arms extended, but she instinctively backed away. What is this man doing here? And why did he take Thunder? Emily looked between Nathan and Manuel, feeling trapped between two worlds, the familiar and comfortable, and the terrifying but possibly true. Uncle Arthur advanced with a severe expression. Manuel, you shouldn't be here. We already talked about this. Talked about what? Emily asked, noticing the exchange of meaningful glances between the men. Nothing important, dear. Arthur forced a smile. Manuel is confused since he got sick. Sometimes he makes up stories. What kind of stories? Nathan approached her cautiously, as if dealing with a frightened animal. Love, you're clearly upset. Let's go back to the church, finish the ceremony. Then we'll talk about all this at home. No. The word came out with more firmness than she expected. First, I want to hear what Manuel has to say. Emily. Arthur's voice carried a warning tone. He said things about my parents, about the accident. I want to know the truth. A tense silence descended over the clearing. The two unknown men positioned themselves discreetly, blocking possible exits, and Emily realized this was not a coincidence. "The truth, my dear niece," said Arthur, abandoning the paternal tone, "is that you're being influenced by a sick man who harbors resentment because he was dismissed for incompetence. And the truth about the documents I signed when I was sick?" Arthur's face hardened. "What documents?" Emily held the envelope more tightly, realizing she had made a mistake in revealing that she knew something. Nathan's eyes fixed on the envelope, and she saw something in them she had never noticed before, a calculated coldness that made her question if she had ever really known him. The documents about the ranch, about the investments, about the control of assets after marriage. "Emily, you're confused," said Nathan, taking another step toward her. "No such document exists. Who's filling your head with these ideas?" But his words sounded too false, too rehearsed, and the way the other men in the clearing positioned themselves made it clear she was in a much more dangerous situation than she had imagined. Manuel, sensing the growing tension, released Thunder's reins and whispered, "Run, girl." The horse, as if understanding the situation, approached Emily and lowered slightly. She didn't hesitate. In a fluid movement she had practiced thousands of times since childhood, she mounted Thunder despite the wedding dress. "Emily, don't be ridiculous," shouted Nathan. "Get down from there immediately." But she was already galloping out of the clearing, holding the reins with one hand and the envelope with the other. Behind her, she could hear shouts of anger and the sound of people running. Thunder knew every trail in that forest, every tree, every stone. He took her down paths she didn't even know existed, jumping over fallen logs and dodging low branches with the agility of one born for that terrain. Only when they reached the old road, far from the church and the shouts, did Emily allow Thunder to slow his pace. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope, and tears began to stream down her face, staining the carefully applied makeup. Everything in her life had been a lie. Her uncle, whom she had loved like a father. Nathan, whom she thought she loved. As a husband, even her own identity was in question. Who was she really without all those people who had shaped and controlled her? But as she rode down the dusty road, dressed as a bride on her black horse, a new sensation began to grow inside her. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since childhood, she felt truly free. Free to make her own decisions, free to discover who she really was, free to honor her parents' memory in the way they would have wanted. The sun was beginning to lean on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and orange hues. Emily didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in a long time that didn't frighten her. She had Thunder, she had the truth in her hands, and she had a lifetime ahead of her to build something true and meaningful. Behind her, on the horizon, she could see the smoke from the cars that were certainly already looking for her. But she had an advantage. She knew those lands better than anyone, and Thunder was faster than any vehicle on those rural paths. It was time to discover exactly what her parents had planned for her, and it was time to decide what kind of woman she wanted to be. 3 days had passed since Emily had ridden away from the church. 3 days hidden in Manuel's old house, a simple property on the outskirts of town, where she could study each document in the envelope without being disturbed. 3 days that completely changed her understanding of her own life. The papers revealed an even more complex plot than she had imagined. Her uncle Arthur had been diverting money from her inheritance for years, using shell companies and fictitious investments. Nathan wasn't just an accomplice, he was the mastermind behind many of the financial operations. They had met long before Nathan was introduced to her at a family party, and their relationship had been carefully orchestrated from the beginning. Even more painful was discovering that her parents really had suspected Arthur before their departure. There was a letter written by her mother, kept in a bank vault that Manuel had helped open with documents proving his identity. In it, her parents explained their dreams for the ranch, and revealed their suspicions about her father's brother's activities. "My dear daughter," the letter said in her mother's delicate handwriting, "if you are reading this, it's because something happened to us. The ranch we built with so much love has a greater purpose. We always dreamed of using our prosperity to help those most in need. We've set aside resources to create a rehabilitation and professional training center, a place where people in difficulties can rebuild their lives. Don't let greed destroy this dream. Trust your heart and the right people." Sitting on the simple porch of Manuel's house, Emily carefully folded the letter. Thunder grazed peacefully in the small pasture beside the house, and for the first time in days she felt a true peace. She knew what she needed to do. "Manuel," she called, finding the elderly man fixing a fence at the back of the property. "I need your help for one last thing." "You can ask, Miss Emily. I want to gather all the people who were harmed by my uncle's schemes, employees unjustly dismissed, small investors who lost money, families who were deceived. It's time for the truth to come out." In the following 2 days, Manuel's house transformed into an operations center. People came from all over the region, former ranch employees, neighbors who had lost their lands in suspicious deals with Arthur, small investors who had been deceived by Nathan in fraudulent schemes. Among them was Mrs. Montgomery, her former piano teacher, who revealed she had lost her retirement savings in an investment that Nathan had guaranteed was absolutely safe. Joshua, the foreman, also came, confessing he had been pressured to lie about the ranch's financial conditions. "Miss Emily," he said with tears in his eyes, "forgive this old man for not speaking up earlier. Your uncle threatened me, said if I told anything I would lose my retirement and my home. There's nothing to forgive, Joshua. We were all victims of their lies." But the most surprising arrival was that of a young lawyer named Charlotte, who introduced herself as the daughter of one of the small investors who had been harmed. She brought news that completely changed the course of the situation. "Emily, I've been investigating your uncle's and Nathan's activities for months. I represent dozens of families who were deceived by them." She opened a folder full of documents. "I've managed to track secret bank accounts, shell companies, even bribes paid to public officials to facilitate certain transactions." "Is this enough to prosecute them?" "It's enough for much more than that. There's evidence of fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, but we need your testimony and the original documents to make the case irrefutable." Emily felt a mixture of fear and determination. She knew confronting her uncle and Nathan would be painful, but she also knew it was the only way to honor her parents' memory and bring justice to all the people who had been harmed. "What do I need to do?" "First, we need to regain legal control of your assets. The documents you signed when you were sick can be annulled due to consent obtained under duress. Second, we need to ensure your safety. These people won't give up easily when they realize we've discovered everything." It was Manuel who suggested the solution. "The best place to meet them is at the ranch itself. It's your home, Miss Emily. It's where you have the most power, and it's where this whole story began." The next morning, Emily returned to the ranch for the first time since the wedding day. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a white shirt and leather boots, and felt more like herself than she had in years. Thunder trotted calmly beneath her, as if he too knew they were finally returning home. The property was strangely silent. Many employees had been dismissed in recent days, supposedly due to budget cuts, but Emily now understood it was to eliminate potential witnesses. The main house seemed less imposing and emptier than she remembered. She found Arthur in his office, bent over piles of documents with a tense expression. When he saw her enter, his face went through a sequence of emotions: relief, anger, fear, and finally a mask of false affection. "Emily, thank God you're okay. We were desperate, searching everywhere." Stop the act, Uncle." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "I know everything." Arthur's face hardened. "What are you talking about?" "About the diversions of money, the false documents, the plan to steal everything from me through the marriage, and I know the truth about my parents." For a moment, only the sound of the antique clock on the wall broke the silence. Then Arthur slowly stood up, and Emily saw in him a man she had never known, cold, calculating, dangerous. "You don't understand how the world works, Emily. Your parents were naive dreamers. They were going to waste all this wealth on romantic projects to help bums and addicts. I saved this heritage from certain ruin. You murdered my parents. I protected our family's future. The mask fell completely. And you should thank me for taking care of you all these years. Nathan chose that moment to enter the office, followed by the same men who were in the forest days before. His face carried an expression that mixed anger and something that seemed like disappointment. I thought you were smarter, Emily. Now it's going to be harder to resolve this in a civilized way. The only thing I want to resolve is to return to each person what you stole from them. That's not going to happen. Nathan took a step toward her. You're going to sign a power of attorney giving your uncle full powers to manage your assets. You're going to move far away from here, and you're going to forget these fantasies about heroism. And if I refuse, then you'll have the same fate your parents had when they refused to cooperate. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Emily felt fear, but also a pure anger she had never experienced before. These men had destroyed her family, lied to her for years, and now had the audacity to threaten her in her own home. There's one thing you don't know, she said calmly. And what would that be? Asked Arthur with disdain. That I didn't come alone. At that moment, the office doors opened and Charlotte entered, followed by 2 police detectives and a district attorney. Behind them came Manuel, Joshua, Mrs. Montgomery, and other people who had been harmed by Arthur and Nathan's schemes. Arthur Parker and Nathan Miller, said one of the detectives, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, and premeditated murder. What followed was a tumult. Nathan tried to escape but was quickly restrained. Arthur remained seated, seeming to have aged 10 years in a few seconds. The men accompanying them tried to resist, but soon found themselves at a clear numerical disadvantage. As the legal procedures unfolded around her, Emily went out to the main house's porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and red that reflected on the fields stretching to the horizon. It was the same view her parents had contemplated, the same land they had loved and worked for. Charlotte joined her on the porch. It's going to take time to resolve everything. Legally, but we've managed to block all the suspicious accounts. The money that was stolen will be returned to the victims. And my parents' project? With the recovered resources, it will be possible to implement exactly what they dreamed. A rehabilitation and professional training center here on the ranch. It will be a worthy legacy for them. 6 months later, Emily was mounted on Thunder, observing the construction of the first building of the Parker Rehabilitation Center. Dozens of workers moved around the construction site, erecting the structure that would soon house people seeking a second chance in life. The wedding dress had been donated to an institution that helped needy women. In its place, Emily wore simple, functional clothes, more suitable for her new life as the administrator of a social project. Her hair was tied in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed calluses from working directly on implementing her dreams. Manuel approached, walking slowly but with a genuine smile on his face. Your parents would be proud, Miss Emily. I hope so. It's strange how sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters. You didn't lose everything. You discovered who you really are. She smiled, running her hand along Thunder's neck. The horse had become more than a companion. He was a symbol of freedom, of intuition, of the deep connection with her true roots. The center had already received its first applications. People recovering from addictions, young people in situations of social vulnerability, unemployed adults seeking new professional qualifications. Each story was unique, but they all had something in common, the need for an opportunity to start over. Emily had hired some of the ranch's former employees who were unjustly dismissed. Joshua returned as Rural Activities Coordinator, teaching sustainable agriculture and animal care. Mrs. Montgomery would give music and art classes, using her talents to help with the residents' occupational therapy. Miss Emily, called Charlotte, approaching with a folder of documents. More donation requests for the project have arrived, local companies wanting to contribute, families offering support. It's amazing how people want to help when they see a genuine, transparent project. And this also arrived. Charlotte handed her a letter. It's from a woman whose son was helped by a similar center in Seattle. She wants to volunteer here. Emily read the letter, feeling deep emotion seeing how her project was already inspiring other people. The woman wrote about how her son had been rescued from drugs thanks to a rehabilitation program, and how she now wanted to dedicate part of her time to helping other families going through the same difficulty. The sun was setting when Emily decided to take her daily ride around the property boundaries. It was a ritual she had adopted, a moment of reflection and connection with the land she now managed, not just as an owner, but as the guardian of a greater legacy. As Thunder trotted along the familiar paths, she thought about how her life had completely changed. 6 months ago, she was about to marry a man she didn't love, hand over her inheritance to people who betrayed her, and live a life built on lies. Today, she was single, independent, and building something that would give meaning not just to her life, but to the lives of many other people. She reached the top of a hill from where she could see the entire extent of the ranch. The green fields stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with the developing center's buildings. On the horizon, the mountains cut against the orange sky of the evening. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, knowing that somehow her parents could hear her, "for showing me the way, even when I was too blind to see." Thunder softly neighed as if agreeing with her words. Together they began to descend the hill toward the house, where a new and true life awaited them. 1 year later, the Parker Rehabilitation Center officially opened its doors. The inauguration ceremony was simple but moving, with the presence of local authorities, community families, and the first residents of the program. Emily, now 28, spoke to the small crowd gathered in the center's main courtyard. She wore a simple white cotton dress and her hair was loose in the wind. Beside her, Thunder patiently waited, decorated with colorful ribbons for the special occasion. "My parents always believed that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share," she said, her voice carrying the emotion of someone who had found her true purpose. "This center isn't just a building or a program, it's a symbol of hope, of second chances, of community." Among those present, she could see familiar and beloved faces. Manuel, now officially hired as the project's historical advisor. Joshua, radiant in his new role as coordinator. Mrs. Montgomery, who had formed a choir with some of the residents. Charlotte, who had become not just her lawyer, but a true friend. "A little over a year ago, I was about to make the worst decision of my life," she continued. "Fortunately, my horse had other plans." Affectionate laughter echoed through the crowd. The story of the wedding interrupted by thunder had become a legend in the region, growing in dramatic details with each retelling. Today, I inaugurate this center not just as a social project, but as a promise. The promise that there will always be a place for those who need to start over. The promise that no person will be judged by their past, but supported in their journey to the future. And the promise that my parents' legacy will live through each life that is transformed here. After the ceremony, as the guests dispersed and night peacefully arrived at the ranch, Emily mounted Thunder for her final ride of the day. It was a ritual she had never abandoned, a sacred moment of connection with herself and with the land she now cared for. The horse knew the way by heart, automatically taking her to the top of her favorite hill. From there, she could see the center's lights on, signaling the beginning of a new era for those lands. In a few months, dozens of people would be sleeping in those rooms, waking to days full of hope and possibilities. The end of the story. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of Emily's journey, a woman who discovered that sometimes you need to flee from an altar to find your true destiny. Her story teaches us that the greatest wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we do with what we have to help others. If this story touched your heart as it touched ours, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit. Leave a like if you believe, like Emily, that everyone deserves a second chance. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had to make a difficult decision that completely change the course of your life. Every week we bring unique stories that make us reflect on love, family, betrayal, and redemption. For an even more immersive experience, click on the special playlist we prepared with similar tales. You'll find it on the left side of this screen. Thank you for accompanying us on this emotional journey. Until the next story, and remember,